The training of women for the war effort during the global conflicts of the 20th century represents one of the most dramatic and transformative shifts in social, economic, and military history, marking a moment when traditional boundaries collapsed under the weight of necessity and opportunity. As the world plunged into the chaos of total war, especially during the First and Second World Wars, nations found themselves confronting a reality in which male labor forces, political structures, and long-standing social arrangements were suddenly disrupted by mass mobilization. Millions of men were drafted into combat, leaving an unprecedented vacuum in factories, farms, hospitals, transportation networks, communication centers, and administrative systems that were vital for national survival. Into this void stepped women, who were not only willing but fully capable of taking on responsibilities that had been denied to them for generations. Yet this transition did not happen spontaneously. It was shaped, strengthened, and legitimized through extensive and highly organized training programs designed to transform women from civilians bound by domestic expectations into skilled workers, specialists, and professionals whose contributions would determine the fate of nations. Governments quickly realized that modern war was not fought solely on battlefields, but in every corner of society. In the workshop that produced ammunition, the farm that supplied food, the laboratory that developed new technologies, the hospital that healed wounded soldiers, the code-breaking center that deciphered enemy communications, and the logistical networks that kept armies moving across continents. Training women for the war effort therefore became an essential national project, intertwining patriotism, education, and modernization into a single purpose: to prepare the female population for large-scale participation in every aspect of wartime life. As governments launched recruitment campaigns encouraging women to volunteer or enlist in auxiliary forces, training centers were built or expanded to accommodate hundreds of thousands of new workers. These facilities became engines of transformation, where women learned everything from mechanical engineering and munitions handling to nursing, radio operation, agricultural science, cryptography, aviation maintenance, supply chain management, and advanced clerical work. What made these programs remarkable was not only the diversity of skills taught, but the intensity and professionalism with which instruction was delivered. Women were trained with military precision, often under the same rigorous conditions that men faced, demonstrating that competence was not a matter of gender, but of opportunity, discipline, and determination. Training programs reshaped women's daily lives, placing them in classrooms, factories, training fields, and laboratories where they underwent hours of lectures, practical drills, and hands-on exercises. In these environments, women learned how to weld steel plates for warships, manufacture bombs with exacting accuracy, repair engines, cultivate crops on mechanized farms, drive military vehicles through rough terrain, operate complex communication machinery, decode sensitive intelligence, track supply inventories, and administer battlefield medical care under extreme pressure. In many countries, women received uniforms, ranks, pay scales, and hierarchical structures mirroring those of male soldiers, further validating their essential role in national defense. The training of women for the war effort did more than fill labor shortages. It redefined the meaning of national service, expanding it beyond the traditionally masculine sphere of combat to include the full spectrum of tasks required to wage modern warfare. This shift also triggered profound social changes. Women who had been confined to domestic roles found themselves working with technology, operating heavy machinery, supervising teams, managing resources, and handling responsibilities that broadened their ambitions and challenged existing social hierarchies. Training programs fostered a sense of discipline, self-confidence, and collective identity, showing women and the societies around them that they were not only capable of supporting the war effort, but were indispensable to its success. The training of women for the war effort did more than fill labor shortages. it defined the meaning of national service, expanding it beyond the traditionally masculine sphere of combat to include the full spectrum of tasks required to wage modern warfare. This shift also triggered profound social changes. Women who had been confined to domestic roles found themselves working with technology, operating heavy machinery, supervising teams, managing resources, and handling responsibilities that broadened their ambitions and challenged existing social hierarchies. Training programs fostered a sense of discipline, self-confidence, and collective identity, showing women and the societies around them that they were not only capable of supporting the war effort, but were indispensable to its success. The training of women for the war effort did more than fill labor shortages. It redefined the meaning of national service, expanding it beyond the traditionally masculine sphere of combat to include the full spectrum of tasks required to wage modern warfare. This shift also triggered profound social changes. Women who had been confined to domestic roles found themselves working with technology, operating heavy machinery, supervising teams, managing resources, and handling responsibilities that broadened their ambitions and challenged existing social hierarchies. The training of women for the war effort did more than just fill labor shortages. It redefined the meaning of national service, expanding it beyond the traditionally masculine sphere of combat to include the full spectrum of tasks required to wage modern warfare. This shift also triggered profound social changes. Women who had been confined to domestic roles found themselves working with technology, operating heavy machinery, supervising teams, managing resources, and handling responsibilities that broadened their ambitions and challenged existing social hierarchies. Training programs fostered a sense of discipline, self-confidence, and collective identity, showing women and the societies around them that they were not only capable of supporting the war effort, but were indispensable to its success. The training of women for the war effort did more than just fill labor shortages. It redefined the meaning of national service, expanding it beyond the traditionally masculine sphere of combat to include the full spectrum of tasks required to wage modern warfare. The training of women for the war effort thus became a powerful symbol of potential and progress, proving that the strength of a nation lies not in limiting its citizens, but in enabling them. Ultimately, the history of women's wartime training is not merely a story of temporary mobilization. It is the story of how millions of women, once restricted by societal norms, rose through discipline, education, and determination to reshape industries, influence politics, challenge discrimination, and lay the foundation for a modern world in which their skills and voices could no longer be dismissed. The outbreak of global war in the early 1940s marked a defining turning point not only for nations and armies, but for societies and the individuals who composed them. As millions of men were drafted or volunteered for military service, the industrial, agricultural, and administrative foundations that sustained wartime mobilization faced an unprecedented shortage of manpower. What had once been stable, predictable civilian economies were suddenly converted into engines of total war. Factories that once built household appliances now needed to produce aircraft frames, artillery shells, communication equipment, and uniforms. Railways that managed daily domestic transport had to shoulder the responsibility of supplying troops across continents. Hospitals that treated seasonal illnesses were transformed into military medical hubs, preparing for mass casualties. The entire system strained under the pressure, and governments quickly recognized that the war could not be won without expanding the nation's labor force far beyond previous boundaries. It was this urgent necessity that opened the doors to a sweeping transformation in women's roles, a shift so profound that it reshaped not only wartime society, but the trajectory of women's rights for generations. Before the war, cultural expectations in many countries placed women primarily in the domestic sphere, responsible for raising children, maintaining households, and supporting male breadwinners. Even in industrialized nations where women had participated in factory labor during earlier economic expansions, their roles were generally limited, temporary, or seen as supplementary. The Great Depression had further reduced women's access to paid labor, as scarce jobs were often reserved for men. Yet the severity of the new global conflict rendered old norms obsolete. Governments urgently needed workers, not merely to fill gaps, but to master complex new tasks requiring discipline, technical skill, and rapid learning. As posters, radio broadcasts, and public speeches spread across cities and rural communities, women were called upon not as secondary helpers, but as essential contributors to national survival. The idea of the home front expanded beyond household management. It became a battlefield of production, organization, and resilience, and women were asked to step into it with determination and pride. Recruitment campaigns were not subtle. They used emotional, patriotic, and practical appeals to reach every corner of society. A mother listening to the radio might hear a message urging her to help build the aircraft that would protect her son at the front. A young woman reading a newspaper advertisement might find herself inspired by images of factory workers wearing protective goggles and strong expressions, reshaping the narrative of femininity into one of courage and capability. Governments also emphasized the moral dimension of women's labor. Joining the workforce was framed not as deviation from traditional roles, but as an extension of women's natural sense of duty, sacrifice, and care. The narrative was powerful. While soldiers held rifles, women would hold tools, bandages, and communication devices, each action equally vital to the war effort. At first, many women doubted whether they truly belonged in these new roles. Industrial machinery, military drills, precision engineering, and logistical planning were all environments historically dominated by men. But training programs were designed not only to teach the necessary tasks, but to build confidence, discipline, and unity. Orientation sessions explained the importance of wartime production. Instructors demonstrated techniques with patience, and early trainees, often called the first wave, became role models for those who followed. As women mastered skills once considered beyond their reach, society began to witness the emergence of a new kind of worker, highly capable, technically proficient, and unshaken by the intense pressures of wartime labor. The call to duty also brought with it a profound emotional transformation. Many women experienced a mixture of fear, excitement, responsibility, and pride as they stepped into environments that had previously been closed to them. Some felt anxious about leaving behind families, homes, and familiar routines. Others were energized by the chance for independence, wages, and new horizons. Training centers quickly became spaces where women discovered not only new skills, but new identities. Friendships blossomed in classrooms, workshops, and barracks. Shared purpose created solidarity, and the knowledge that their work directly supported soldiers added a deep sense of meaning to every task they learned. Governments, sensing the momentum, soon expanded their recruitment strategies. Universities were asked to accelerate technical courses for women. Employers received government incentives to hire and train female workers. Military branches formed auxiliary corps to allow women to serve in uniformed support roles. In some countries, women were granted uniforms, badges, and ranks for the first time, signaling that their service was recognized as part of the broader military structure. Although most were not placed in direct combat roles, their responsibilities were no less vital. They operated radios, deciphered codes, drove military transport vehicles, maintained aircraft engines, managed supply chains, and supported medical operations, each task requiring rigorous training and unwavering dedication. One of the most remarkable aspects of this shift was the speed at which women adapted. Wartime urgency eliminated the luxury of long apprenticeships. Instead, training programs were condensed, intensive, and highly practical. A woman might learn in a few weeks what had previously taken months or years. Instructors focused on essential proficiencies rather than lengthy theoretical foundations. This efficiency demonstrated not only women's ability to learn quickly, but also their capacity to thrive under pressure. Many male officers and factory managers, initially skeptical, were soon impressed by the precision, discipline, and consistency women brought to their tasks. The call to duty also revealed the diverse backgrounds of the women who stepped forward. Housewives, students, teachers, farm workers, clerks, and even retirees joined the effort. Some came from small villages with little exposure to industrial life. Others had experience in urban workplaces, but had never imagined working in uniform or handling machinery designed for warfare. This diversity enriched training environments, fostered collaborative learning, and broadened the social fabric of the wartime workforce. Women learned from one another as much from their instructors, exchanging skills, strategies, and stories that helped strengthen morale and build a sense of shared destiny. Yet the transition was not without challenges. Resistance came from various sources: traditionalists who feared social upheaval, employers reluctant to adjust workplace norms, and even some male workers who felt threatened by women entering fields long dominated by men. Training programs had to not only teach technical skills, but navigate prejudice, logistical hurdles, and societal skepticism. Still, each successful cohort of trained women chipped away at old assumptions, proving through competence and dedication that they were not merely temporary stand-ins, but capable contributors to national defense. By the end of the first year of mobilization, a new era for women had undeniably begun. The call to duty had done more than fill factory floors and auxiliary ranks. It had reshaped self-perception, societal expectations, and government policies. Women were no longer viewed solely as caretakers, but as builders, strategists, communicators, and defenders of their nations. The training they received laid the foundation for an entirely transformed social landscape, one in which the boundaries of gender and labor would never return to their pre-war form. The transition from home-centered lives to the demanding world of war industries represented one of the most dramatic social shifts in the history of modern warfare. Women who had previously managed households, raised children, or worked in modest civilian jobs suddenly found themselves at the center of national production lines, assembling aircraft, welding ship frames, shaping artillery shells, repairing engines, and performing precision tasks that would determine the outcome of battles across continents. This chapter explores the profound transformation that unfolded during this transition, detailing the emotional, cultural, industrial, and logistical challenges that shaped women's entry into wartime industries. The story is not simply one of employment, it is a narrative of reinvention, resilience, and the rediscovery of capability on a massive scale. Before the war, few imagined that women would take on such technical and physically demanding work. Factories were widely considered masculine spaces, loud, hazardous, and requiring brute strength. Yet when thousands of men left for the front lines, these same factories faced immediate labor shortages that threatened to cripple national production. Governments and industrial leaders realized that without women, the engines of war would grind to a halt. The shift from home to factory floors became both a patriotic mission and a social necessity. Women who had never considered working outside the home suddenly found themselves recruited, trained, and placed at the core of the war economy. This transformation began with massive public information campaigns. Posters showed confident women tightening bolts on aircraft wings, welding steel armor, or operating heavy machinery. Films and newsreels portrayed them as symbols of strength and reliability. These visual messages were essential as they encouraged women to imagine themselves in roles that society had previously denied them. Recruitment centers quickly filled with applicants, young women seeking wages and adventure, older women hoping to support their families, and mothers determined to contribute directly to the war effort. But the shift was not simple. Women entering war industries had to adapt to entirely new routines. They learned to wake before dawn, catch crowded transport to industrial zones, manage long working hours under strict schedules, and acclimate to the deafening noise of machinery. Many were shocked by the industrial environment, the heat of furnaces, the sharp scent of metal, the vibration of heavy tools, and the constant rhythm of assembly lines. Yet with each passing day, they became more confident in their surroundings. Training programs taught the basics of safety procedures, tool handling, teamwork, and machinery operation. Supervisors demonstrated techniques carefully, knowing that mistakes could be dangerous. Women quickly proved that they could master complex tasks with precision and endurance. One of the most significant hurdles was the physical adjustment. Factory work demanded stamina, lifting equipment, standing for hours, maneuvering heavy materials. Many women had never engaged in such strenuous activity, but training programs incorporated fitness routines to strengthen them for the demands of production. Over time, women who had once doubted their physical capacity discovered that with proper technique and the right tools, they could match or even exceed the productivity of their male predecessors. As their strength grew, so did their pride. They began to see themselves not just as temporary workers, but as essential contributors to national victory. Another major challenge was societal judgment. While governments encouraged women to work, parts of society still clung to old expectations. Some criticized women for stepping outside traditional domestic roles. Others questioned their abilities or believed that once the war ended, women should immediately return home. Many women found themselves balancing work with domestic responsibilities, cooking, cleaning, and raising children, while also contributing to high-pressure factory environments. Despite these obstacles, the determination of women remained unwavering. They understood that the war depended on their labor, and they embraced the responsibility. Inside the factories, women encountered both support and skepticism. Some male supervisors treated them fairly, impressed by their efficiency and attention to detail. Others doubted their capability, offering unnecessary restrictions or refusing to train them on advanced machinery. However, as women proved their competence, resistance diminished. Productivity reports showed that women excelled in roles requiring precision, patience, and consistency. They performed delicate wiring tasks for aircraft engines, calibrated instruments, and assembled complex mechanical systems with remarkable accuracy. Their contribution became undeniable. A crucial element of this transition was the development of specialized training programs. Governments partnered with industries to create crash courses on welding, riveting, machining, radio assembly, engine repair, and quality control. Technical schools opened new departments dedicated to training women, and instructors adapted teaching methods to accommodate learners from diverse educational backgrounds. Some women entered training with years of schooling. Others had minimal formal education, yet all shared a common goal: to contribute effectively and safely to wartime production. Training centers became spaces of empowerment, fostering discipline, teamwork, and confidence. The psychological transformation was equally profound. Many women experienced a newfound sense of independence and identity. Factory work provided them with steady wages, social networks, and a sense of purpose that extended beyond household responsibilities. Paychecks gave them economic autonomy, sometimes for the first time in their lives. For younger women, the industrial workforce opened paths to education, political awareness, and civic engagement. For older women, it offered renewed dignity and recognition. The war industries did not just reshape the national economy, they reshaped millions of personal futures. The transition from home to industry also required major shifts in daily life and community support structures. Childcare centers were established near factories, providing safe environments for children while their mothers worked. Transportation systems expanded to accommodate early morning and late night shifts. Cafeterias offered inexpensive meals to help workers maintain strength during long hours. Medical stations ensured on-site care for injuries and fatigue. These logistical supports were crucial in enabling women to remain productive and safe. Despite the challenges, women's impact on war production was extraordinary. They built aircraft faster than predicted, repaired damaged vehicles returning from the front, assembled ammunition with unmatched precision, and maintained the machinery that kept factories running. Industries reported dramatic increases in output, directly influencing military success on land, sea, and air. Women's labor became a strategic advantage, an indispensable force driving the war machine. Perhaps the most remarkable element of this transition was the sense of unity it created among workers. Women from different regions, cultures, and economic backgrounds worked side by side, forming bonds that transcended previous social divisions. Through shared labor, struggles, and achievements, they forged a collective identity rooted in strength and service. Factory floors became communities, places of learning, collaboration, and mutual support. By the end of the war, the transition from home to industry had permanently altered women's relationship with work, society, and self-perception. They had proved that they could master technical fields, endure physically demanding labor, and adapt to high-pressure environments. Their success challenged old beliefs and laid the foundation for future movements in women's labor rights and gender equality. What began as a temporary wartime necessity became a catalyst for long-term social change. The transformation of ordinary women into uniformed specialists marked one of the most remarkable evolutions of the wartime era. As global conflict intensified and armies expanded across continents, the demand for trained personnel skyrocketed. Military headquarters quickly realized that victory required far more than combat troops. It required legions of skilled support workers capable of handling communications, logistics, intelligence, vehicle coordination, aircraft maintenance, medical support, and administrative functions. Yet with millions of men deployed to battlefields, the military faced a widening gap. Women stepped forward to fill it, joining auxiliary corps in unprecedented numbers and entering training programs that fundamentally reshaped their identities, skills, and futures. This chapter explores the rigorous and transformative world of military auxiliary training, detailing how women shifted from civilian life into structured, disciplined, and specialized roles that supported war operations around the globe. Their journey was far from simple. It demanded physical endurance, psychological resilience, precision, and rapid mastery of complex tasks. But through determination and intensive training systems, women proved themselves indispensable to the functioning of modern warfare. The decision to recruit women into auxiliary military branches was initially met with hesitation. Traditionalists argued that military environments were unsuitable for women. Others feared that placing women in uniform would blur gender expectations. Yet the necessities of war overrode outdated assumptions. Governments soon launched large-scale campaigns inviting women to join auxiliary services, such as the Women's Army Corps, WAC, Auxiliary Territorial Service, ATS, Women's Auxiliary Air Force, WAAF, and similar units worldwide. These organizations were designed to integrate women into the structure of military operations, uniformed, trained, disciplined, and essential. Training centers sprang up across cities, bases, and rural camps, each equipped with classrooms, drill grounds, barracks, and technical workshops. Women arrived from diverse backgrounds: school teachers, clerks, farm workers, factory hands, students, homemakers. Many had never held a military-related responsibility or lived in a regimented environment. Their first challenge was adapting to military discipline. Reveille sounded before sunrise, mornings began with inspections, and days were structured hour by hour. Uniforms had to be clean, boots polished, beds tightly made. The precision of these routines was not merely ceremonial. It was intended to instill teamwork, alertness, and responsibility. Drill instructors, often seasoned military NCOs, taught marching, formations, signaling, obedience to commands, and physical conditioning. For many women, the first days of training were physically exhausting. Exercises included long-distance marches, obstacle courses, weapon handling safety, even if they would not use them in combat, and endurance drills. Physical fitness was considered essential for long working hours in high-pressure roles, such as radar monitoring, field communications, ambulance driving, or aircraft maintenance. Once women mastered the basics of discipline and physical conditioning, they shifted into specialized tracks based on aptitude, interest, and military need. One of the most critical fields was communications. Armed forces relied heavily on secure, accurate, and rapid information exchange. Women trained in operating switchboards, field telephones, Morse code transmitters, and wireless radio sets. Instructors drilled them in speed, clarity, memory, and calm under pressure. A single miscommunicated message could alter the outcome of a mission. Women became experts in encoding and decoding signals, maintaining radio equipment, and coordinating transmission networks that linked frontline units to command centers. Another crucial area was transportation and vehicle operation. Women learned to drive military trucks, jeeps, ambulances, and supply vehicles. They trained in engine maintenance, tire replacement, fuel efficiency, and off-road navigation. Many had never driven before joining the auxiliary forces, yet within weeks they were maneuvering heavy vehicles through mud, snow, and blackout conditions. Their role in transporting supplies, evacuating wounded soldiers, and supporting troop movements saved countless lives and kept armies mobile. Aircraft-related tasks formed another major component of auxiliary training. Women in air forces learned to assist in flight operations, tracking aircraft movements, calculating flight paths, preparing weather reports, maintaining equipment, and guiding pilots through landing procedures. Radar operation was among the most demanding specialties. Women endured long hours sitting in darkened rooms, interpreting faint signals on screens, distinguishing enemy movements from friendly ones, and sending instant alerts to air defense units. Accuracy was critical. Hesitation or misinterpretation could mean the loss of aircraft or entire cities. Administrative roles also required rigorous training. Women were taught military filing systems, personnel tracking, payroll operations, logistics documentation, and inventory management. Though less glamorous than field duties, these tasks were vital for keeping armies organized and supplied. Administrative specialists learned speed typing, shorthand, coding formats, and the handling of confidential documents. Medical support roles within auxiliary branches demanded equally intense preparation. Women trained as nursing aides, surgical assistants, medical clerks, and field medics. Their instruction included wound care, stretcher handling, sanitation protocols, triage management, and emergency response procedures. Though full details of medical roles are covered in the next chapter, it is important to recognize that Auxiliary Corps provided the structural backbone for many frontline support medical units. Some women underwent training in intelligence gathering and analysis. They learned observation techniques, report writing, document examination, and methods for interpreting aerial photographs. While not directly involved in espionage, their work contributed significantly to operational planning and battlefield strategy. Life inside training camps forged deep camaraderie. Women who entered as strangers emerged as cohesive teams. They supported one another through the challenges of discipline, homesickness, fatigue, and the constant anxiety of a world at war. Evening hours in the barracks often included discussions, singing, letter writing, and quiet moments of reflection. Friendships formed in training lasted long after the war, bonded by shared trials and accomplishments. Despite their success, women in auxiliary roles continued to face prejudice. Some male officers doubted their abilities, assigning them mundane tasks or refusing to train them for advanced specialties. Others underestimated their contributions, dismissing their roles as secondary. But as women demonstrated competence, sometimes outperforming men in accuracy, organization, and endurance, resistance softened. Military reports documented their reliability, and commanders increasingly relied on female units for critical operations. Uniforms played a symbolic role in this transformation. Putting on a military uniform represented far more than a change of clothing. It was an acceptance of responsibility, identity, and purpose. Women marched with pride during inspections and ceremonies, aware that they were part of something larger than themselves. Their service helped redefine national perceptions of womanhood, strength, and citizenship. By the midpoint of the war, women in auxiliary corps had become indispensable. They staffed anti-aircraft command posts, coordinated troop movements, repaired aircraft, drove supply convoys, decoded encrypted messages, and maintained communication lines stretching across continents. Their presence allowed armies to deploy more men to combat roles, directly strengthening the front lines. The transition from civilian to uniformed specialist was not merely a temporary adaptation. It represented a profound shift in the relationship between women and national defense. For the first time, women served not as silent supporters in the background, but as organized, trained, respected members of military institutions. They gained confidence, technical knowledge, and professional discipline, skills that would reshape their post-war lives and influence future generations. The transformation of women into medically trained wartime specialists stands as one of the most emotionally powerful and strategically essential chapters in the story of the global conflict. While they did not carry rifles or lead assaults, women of the medical corps walked closer to the front lines than many imagined possible. Their battlefield was not defined by trenches or artillery positions, but by crowded field hospitals, mobile surgical units, evacuation tents, hospital ships, and makeshift clinics carved into war-torn landscapes. They fought not by taking lives, but by saving them, stitch by stitch, bandage by bandage, breath by breath. Their courage was quiet, steady, and relentless. It demanded endurance, discipline, and emotional resilience. This chapter explores the training that prepared women for this vital role, detailing the intensity, complexity, and humanity that shaped their contribution to the war effort. Women entering medical training came from a variety of backgrounds. Some were already nurses with civilian experience, others had no medical knowledge beyond simple household care. The military understood that the needs of war were vastly different from peacetime healthcare, and thus created an entirely new framework for training. Civilian nurses underwent accelerated military conversion programs, while new recruits entered structured courses designed to transform them into competent wartime medical professionals. The emphasis was placed on speed, precision, and adaptability, qualities essential when dealing with mass casualties, limited supplies, and unpredictable battlefield conditions. Training often began with fundamental instruction: anatomy, sanitation, basic wound care, sterilization procedures, and emergency response. Recruits learned how to identify fractures, control bleeding, handle burns, and administer medication. Yet this was only the foundation. Military medical work demanded far more complex skills, so soon the training escalated into surgical assistance, triage management, infection control, blood transfusion procedures, and the use of field medical equipment. Women learned how to prepare operating rooms in tents, organize supply chests for mobile surgical teams, and improvise when standard tools were unavailable. They were trained to anticipate the needs of surgeons, respond instantly to orders, and maintain sterility in chaotic, crowded environments. The physical demands of medical corps training surprised many new recruits. Carrying stretchers required strength and coordination. Nurses practiced lifting wounded soldiers, maneuvering them through rubble or narrow spaces, and transporting them over uneven ground. They trained in emergency evacuations, running while supporting heavy loads, dragging injured men under simulated fire, and guiding litters through smoky, low-visibility conditions. Military instructors emphasized that hesitation could cost a life. Every movement had to be quick, steady, and confident. Psychological training was equally important. Women learned techniques for staying calm during mass casualty events, managing their breathing during high-pressure procedures, and maintaining emotional distance without losing compassion. Instructors held simulation drills where dozens of wounded soldiers were brought in at once, shouting, crying, or unconscious. Trainees had to perform rapid triage, classify patients by severity, prioritize critical cases, and provide immediate stabilization. The goal was not to eliminate emotion, but to channel it into efficiency. Many women later recalled that these training drills were essential for surviving the first real battlefield evacuations they encountered. One of the most challenging aspects of medical training was sanitation and infection control. With wartime injuries often involving shrapnel, burns, and contaminated wounds, infections posed deadly risks. Women were trained with meticulous strictness, how to sterilize instruments, clean wounds thoroughly, prevent cross-contamination, and maintain order in crowded facilities. They learned how to improvise when water was scarce, when sterilization equipment malfunctioned, or when supply lines were disrupted. Their ability to adapt kept countless soldiers alive in conditions that would have otherwise been fatal. In addition to physical and technical skills, nurses were trained in the critical art of communication. Field medicine required constant coordination among doctors, stretcher teams, drivers, supply officers, and field commanders. Women learned to relay patient information quickly and accurately, manage medical records, track supplies, and report critical shortages. They were trained to make decisions independently when doctors were overwhelmed or unavailable. These leadership responsibilities became essential during large offensives, retreats, or sudden enemy attacks. Medical corps training also included preparation for deployment in varied environments. Women stationed in desert theaters learned how to treat dehydration, heat stroke, sand-infected wounds, and diseases like malaria. In snowbound regions, they trained in frostbite treatment, hypothermia management, and the challenges of transporting wounded soldiers through ice and snow. Some underwent specialized training for hospital ships, learning maritime protocols, seasickness management, and emergency procedures for treating sailors rescued from torpedoed vessels. Others were trained for tropical jungles, where humidity, insects, and dense vegetation complicated both medical treatment and patient transport. One of the least recognized but most essential aspects of training was emotional resilience. Women learned from experienced nurses how to cope with loss, how to continue treating the next patient even as the previous one died in their arms. They received instruction in delivering comfort to dying soldiers, writing letters to families, and providing psychological support to traumatized survivors. Many nurses later recalled that training could never fully prepare them for the horrors of war, yet it gave them the tools to function despite them. As women completed their training, they received uniforms, symbols not only of military identity but of the responsibility they now carried. They were assigned ranks, duties, and postings. Some went to established military hospitals far from the front, while others were deployed to field hospitals just miles behind active combat. Some followed advancing armies, setting up new treatment centers as territory shifted. Others served in evacuation teams, riding ambulances that darted between front lines and medical posts under shell fire. A few volunteered for overseas missions, traveling by ship through dangerous waters patrolled by enemy submarines. Once deployed, the value of their training became clear immediately. Nurses maintained order in chaos, stabilized the wounded under fire, assisted in life-saving surgeries, and brought discipline to medical operations strained by overwhelming numbers. They worked exhausting shifts, sometimes 20 hours straight, sleeping briefly before returning to their duties. Despite the severity of their work, they maintained kindness, courage, and calm. Their impact went beyond medical skill. Soldiers often describe nurses as symbols of hope, reminders that humanity still existed amidst destruction. A nurse's voice could calm a panicked soldier. Her steady hands could reassure him that he was not alone. Many men credited nurses with saving not only their bodies, but their will to survive. The contribution of trained women in the medical corps directly influenced military success. Rapid treatment reduced infection, saved limbs, and returned soldiers to combat sooner. Efficient triage allowed medical units to handle mass casualties during major offensives. Skilled surgical assistance increased survival rates dramatically compared to earlier wars. In mobile campaigns, nurses ensured that medical support moved as efficiently as the troops themselves. By the end of the war, women of the medical corps had earned global admiration. Their training had prepared them for one of the hardest roles in wartime service, facing suffering daily, standing on the threshold between life and death, fighting without weapons, yet performing acts of extraordinary bravery. Their legacy reshaped the world's understanding of women's capability in crisis, laying foundations for expanded roles in post-war medicine, emergency response, and military healthcare. In every major conflict, there exists a front line the world rarely sees, an invisible battlefield built not from trenches and explosions, but from wires, signals, codes, and the minds capable of decoding them. During World War II, as millions of men were deployed to conventional battlefields, a parallel army of women was quietly being trained and mobilized for one of the most intellectually demanding wartime missions in history. These women, codebreakers, clerks, telephonists, cipher operators, radio specialists, and intelligence assistants, formed the backbone of the war's communication and information network. Their contribution, though often unrecognized during their lifetime, proved vital in shaping operational outcomes, strategic decisions, and ultimately the outcome of the war itself. The training of women for these highly specialized communication roles represented a dramatic break from earlier peacetime norms. Before the war, few women were permitted to handle confidential governmental communications, and even fewer were taught the mathematics, cryptography, or telecommunication skills needed for classified work. Yet by 1942, as the need for intelligence and secure communication exploded, women emerged as the natural answer to unprecedented demand. They filled roles previously considered too technical, too sensitive, or too important to entrust to anyone but career military men. In training schools across the Allied nations, instructors discovered that women could absorb cryptographic techniques with remarkable speed, type encrypted messages faster than most men, and demonstrate high levels of discipline, accuracy, and secrecy, an essential combination for intelligence work. Their training began with the fundamentals of communication technology. Women were instructed in the use of teleprinters, switchboards, stenography machines, and early mechanical cipher devices. For codebreakers specifically, the training moved into advanced territory: frequency analysis, pattern recognition, linguistic reconstruction, and mathematical modeling. At institutions like Bletchley Park in Britain or Arlington Hall in the United States, female recruits underwent rigorous instruction, learning how to process intercepted enemy signals, categorize them based on encryption type, and compile daily reports essential for decryption teams. Although many of these women were never told the full extent of their work, they recognized its importance in the way their instructors emphasized precision, secrecy, and intellectual discipline. The code-breaking schools were unlike any other wartime training centers. Days were long, often stretching to 12 or 14 hours, and filled with a dense mixture of theory, practice, and simulation. Recruits were given pages of encrypted messages to crack, not knowing whether each sheet represented a German naval maneuver, a Japanese communication relay, or a false signal meant to confuse Allied intelligence. They learned to adapt quickly, switching between codes, machine ciphers, and hand cipher systems depending on the intercepted material. Even more demanding was the emotional weight of the work. Mistakes in decoding could cost lives, delay operations, or render intelligence useless. Women were trained not only to master technique, but to maintain absolute emotional resilience. Parallel to the code-breaking divisions, tens of thousands of women were trained as clerks, typists, and communication specialists for the military's administrative backbone. These training programs focused on speed, accuracy, and record-keeping. A single clerical error could disrupt the coordination of entire divisions, misroute critical supplies, or compromise secret documents. Therefore, training schools created fast-paced drills that replicated wartime pressure. Rapid transcription exercises, long hours of document handling, and strict adherence to cataloging protocols. Women were also taught how to manage field reports, maintain personnel records, assemble intelligence summaries, and process classified correspondence without revealing a single detail. Communication specialists, particularly switchboard operators and radio personnel, underwent equally intense programs. These women were responsible for maintaining real-time contact between commanders, bases, naval fleets, and air squadrons. Their training emphasized clarity, timing, and disciplined listening. They learned how to handle overloaded communication lines, prioritize emergency signals, and implement encrypted verbal codes. Because enemy forces frequently targeted communication channels, these women also trained in emergency procedures, including rapid equipment replacement, secure shutdown protocols, and fallback communication methods using alternative channels. One of the most demanding aspects of training for women in information roles was the expectation of absolute silence. Entire training modules were dedicated to operational secrecy. Recruits were informed that discussing their work outside of authorized settings, even with close family, could lead to court-martial, imprisonment, or catastrophic security breaches. This secrecy persisted long after the war, with many women remaining silent about their contributions for decades. Their silence became an extension of their service, a symbolic continuation of the discipline instilled during training. As women progressed through their courses, instructors evaluated them not only for technical skill, but also for temperament. Patience, concentration, teamwork, and emotional control were treated as vital competencies. Some women were naturally suited for the monotony of deciphering endless streams of encoded text. Others excelled at rapid communication management or high-stress radio operations. Training officials matched recruits to roles where their strengths could best serve the war effort. In this way, the training system became a highly efficient pipeline, transforming civilians into specialized operators whose work held strategic weight. The importance of women's communication training cannot be overstated. In cryptography, their contributions shortened the war, saving countless lives. In clerical and administrative systems, they ensured the smooth functioning of vast military operations. In telecommunications, they kept information flowing across continents, oceans, and battlefield theaters. And through their rigorous training, often conducted in secrecy, under pressure, and without public recognition, they became the invisible network supporting every major military action. War is not won by soldiers alone. It is won by the silent machinery behind them, the supply lines that deliver food, fuel, ammunition, clothing, medicine, and every material that keeps armies alive and operational. During World War II, as millions of men left factories, farms, transport services, and warehouses to join military units, the responsibility for sustaining entire nations fell increasingly on the shoulders of women. Training women for agricultural and logistical roles became not just essential, but foundational to every military victory achieved on the front lines. Their work fed millions, moved mountains of supplies, and built the logistical backbone that made modern warfare possible. The shift began with the collapse of the pre-war labor system. Agriculture faced an immediate crisis. With men gone, fields were under-harvested, supply chains slowed, and food shortages threatened national stability. Governments responded by launching extensive programs to train women as agricultural workers, transforming civilians with no prior farming experience into skilled laborers capable of running full-scale agricultural operations. These women became the driving force of wartime food production, plowing, sowing, harvesting, operating machinery, and managing livestock with professionalism equal to seasoned farmers. Training centers across Britain, the United States, Canada, and the Soviet Union began recruiting women for programs such as the Women's Land Army, focusing on practical, intensive instruction that merged traditional agricultural knowledge with new wartime technologies. Instructors taught women how to properly prepare soil, maximize crop yields, recognize plant diseases, maintain irrigation systems, and handle seasonal planting cycles essential for national food output. The training was hands-on and demanding. Recruits were drilled in the use of heavy tools, tractors, threshers, milking devices, and new mechanical systems never before intended for women's use. Many came from cities and had never stepped foot in a field, yet wartime necessity forged them into experts within weeks. Their training emphasized physical endurance, adaptability, and resilience, qualities they needed as they worked through harsh weather, long hours, and labor shortages, often performing the work of entire teams on their own. Parallel to agricultural work, governments launched specialized programs to train women in food preservation, storage management, and rationing systems. These recruits learned how to manage large-scale canning operations, preserve fruits and vegetables to prevent spoilage, and oversee distribution centers that delivered crucial supplies both to civilians and the military. They became skilled in maintaining government-run depots, ensuring that food reserves were stable enough to endure disruptions caused by bombings, transportation delays, or enemy attacks on supply routes. Women working in rationing offices were trained to track inventories, assess needs across districts, and create equitable systems for distributing scarce resources. Beyond agriculture, logistics became another domain where women's training reshaped the wartime workforce. Military logistics is an intricate science, one that requires synchronized management of transport networks, supply depots, vehicle fleets, and communication lines connecting factories to battlefields. Previously dominated by trained male specialists, these positions were soon filled by women who underwent rigorous programs teaching them the essentials of wartime movement and supply management. Training centers prepared women to become transport drivers, warehouse coordinators, freight handlers, dispatch officers, and inventory managers. Transport training was among the most physically intensive. Women learned to drive large military trucks, ambulances, fuel carriers, and supply vehicles under difficult conditions. They practiced maneuvering heavy vehicles across muddy fields, narrow roads, steep inclines, and blackout conditions where headlights could not be used due to enemy aircraft. Mechanics training was also common. Women were taught to replace tires, repair engines, fix electrical systems, and perform emergency roadside maintenance on supply convoys. These skills made them indispensable in both civilian and military logistical operations, where every broken-down vehicle could delay thousands of troops. Warehouse and depot training introduced women to the complex world of inventory control. They were responsible for cataloging shipments, loading and unloading supplies, managing storehouses filled with ammunition, uniforms, medical supplies, and vehicle parts. They learned how to navigate large-scale logistics hubs that formed the heartbeat of Allied operations, supplying frontline troops by rail, air, and sea. Training programs emphasized accuracy, discipline, and efficiency. Miscalculations could lead to shortages on the front lines, putting lives at risk. Women also became central to wartime rail networks. They learned how to operate trains, manage cargo loading schedules, switch tracks, and work as station clerks overseeing military transport timetables. Their work kept troop movements organized, food shipments steady, and weapons production linked to deployment lines. In ports and shipyards, women trained as dock workers, crane operators, and loading supervisors, roles previously unimaginable for women, but suddenly vital as shipping demands skyrocketed. They hauled cargo nets, secured containers, and coordinated with naval officers to ensure that supply vessels were correctly stocked before departure. In aviation logistics, women received training in aircraft loading, maintenance documentation, fuel management, and airfield supply coordination. Their training included understanding aircraft weight distribution, emergency handling of volatile fuel, and rapid turnaround procedures required for wartime air operations. They often worked alongside female ferry pilots, ensuring that aircraft were properly provisioned before being delivered to combat zones. A particularly demanding area of training involved fuel and energy logistics. Women learned how to manage fuel depots, operate pumping systems, handle dangerous materials safely, and maintain accurate records of fuel distribution across regions. They became integral to energy conservation programs, teaching communities how to reduce fuel consumption and manage heating systems. As cities faced shortages due to blockades and enemy attacks, these women ensured that essential industries remained operational. The emotional and physical demands of logistical training were immense. Women working in agriculture endured isolation, heavy labor, and unpredictable weather. Those in transport faced the constant danger of accidents, fatigue, and exposure to enemy action. Convoys were prime targets for bombings and sabotage. Warehouse workers managed vast quantities of potentially hazardous materials, while port and rail workers operated in environments where a single mistake could cause catastrophic accidents. Despite these pressures, training programs emphasized teamwork, morale, and national responsibility. Women learned that their work, though far from the battlefield, was no less crucial. Feeding soldiers meant feeding victory. Fueling vehicles meant powering offensives. Managing supplies meant sustaining entire armies whose survival rested on logistical precision. By the war's end, women had transformed national agricultural output, keeping nations alive through the worst shortages of the conflict. They had mastered the logistics that allowed modern armies to move with unprecedented speed and coordination. Their training programs created a wartime workforce capable of performing roles once thought impossible for women, proving not only their competence, but their indispensability. The legacy of this training continued long after the guns fell silent. Many women remained in agricultural and logistical professions, reshaping peacetime industries with the same strength and expertise they displayed during the war. They built careers in supply chain management, transport services, industrial distribution, and food production, fields forever changed by the wartime necessity that had opened their doors. The end of World War II marked a turning point, not only for geopolitics and military strategy, but for the millions of women who had stepped into roles previously denied to them. When the global conflict concluded, armies demobilized, factories slowed, and nations attempted to return to pre-war routines. Yet the training women had undergone, intense, disciplined, technical, and transformative, had reshaped their perception of themselves and the world's perception of them. This final chapter explores the long-term legacy of wartime training, the social and economic shifts it triggered, and how the skills women gained laid the groundwork for broader change that extended far beyond the battlefields and barracks of World War II. The immediate aftermath of the war brought widespread debates. Should women return to domestic life, or should they continue contributing to national industries and infrastructures they had helped preserve? Governments encouraged them to step back so male veterans could reclaim their pre-war jobs, but many women found themselves unwilling to return to traditional norms. Their wartime training had granted them technical knowledge, leadership experience, and confidence in their abilities, qualities impossible to unlearn. For many, working in agriculture, communications, logistics, medicine, engineering, and administrative systems had become more than duty, it had become identity. The legacy of training was visible first in the workforce. Women who had learned to operate complex machinery, manage logistics networks, or conduct cryptographic analysis sought employment that matched their wartime expertise. Some transitioned into emerging fields like telecommunications, aviation support, engineering assistance, and industrial management. Others carried their discipline and organizational skills into public service positions, government offices, and educational roles. The war had cracked open professional doors, and even though some closed again after 1945, many remained permanently ajar, allowing future generations of women to enter careers that had once been unthinkable. In intelligence fields, the impact was especially dramatic. Women trained as codebreakers, cipher clerks, and communication specialists helped lay the foundation for modern intelligence agencies. Their wartime contributions influenced the formation and expansion of institutions like the CIA, GCHQ, and other national signals intelligence organizations. Many of these women continued working discreetly in intelligence roles, their training evolving into long-term careers in cybersecurity, cryptanalysis, and strategic communication. Their expertise became a quiet but integral part of post-war national security infrastructure. In agriculture, the legacy of training appeared in the modernization of farming practices. Women who had mastered mechanical farming techniques and livestock management continued working in agricultural communities, often pushing for modernization, sustainable practices, and improved food production systems. Their wartime experience also contributed to stronger rural economies, as many women used their skills to support cooperative movements, agricultural education programs, and the mechanization of small farms. They had proven that farming was not solely the domain of men, and they ensured that the industry retained its wartime inclusivity long after peace returned. Similarly, the logistical training women received helped fuel advancements in transportation, warehousing, and supply chain management. Many women found opportunities in postal services, commercial trucking, rail operations, and warehouse administration. Their wartime efficiency became a model for civilian logistics, influencing the way modern supply systems were structured and operated. The discipline they had learned, inventory accuracy, route planning, emergency readiness, and operational timing, became valuable assets in peacetime industries. Beyond the workforce, the legacy of training influenced societal attitudes. During the war, women had demonstrated not only competence, but resilience, intelligence, and leadership under pressure. They had operated code machines that turned the tide of naval battles, delivered medical care under fire, managed aircraft supplies, produced essential agricultural goods, and maintained entire communication networks. Public opinion slowly shifted as nations recognized these contributions. Wartime posters and propaganda that once portrayed women solely as symbols of sacrifice began acknowledging their technical and operational abilities. This shift contributed to early conversations about gender equality, workplace protections, and educational access. Education was another realm transformed by wartime training. Women who had been introduced to mathematics, engineering principles, medical sciences, and mechanical operations pursued higher education after the war, often supported by emerging scholarship programs. Their wartime exposure had revealed talents they never knew they possessed and opened pathways for women's participation in STEM fields. Universities that had once limited female enrollment began expanding access, acknowledging that the war had proven women's capabilities in the sciences and technical disciplines. Perhaps the most profound legacy of wartime training was psychological. Women who had once been told their place was solely in the home had now repaired engines, driven military convoys, run large agricultural operations, translated enemy intelligence, and coordinated nationwide logistics. They had experienced camaraderie, independence, and a sense of purpose that reshaped their identity. Many carried this transformed self-perception into their communities, raising daughters who understood that a woman's capabilities extended far beyond traditional boundaries. The ripple effects of wartime training influenced future movements for women's rights. The confidence women gained contributed to the push for equal pay, workplace protections, and anti-discrimination laws. The rise of post-war feminist activism owed much to the foundation laid by wartime experience. The message was clear. Women had proven themselves indispensable in national survival, and that recognition became a cornerstone of the struggle for gender equality. The global impact of women's wartime training also became evident in developing nations. As countries rebuilt their economies, they looked to wartime models of women's labor participation, integrating women into agricultural development, public health systems, and administrative services. International organizations later drew inspiration from wartime mobilization when designing programs aimed at increasing women's participation in nation building. Another significant legacy was technological advancement. Many of the fields women trained in, cryptography, logistics, aviation support, communication technology, grew rapidly in the post-war decades. The early work women performed in these areas strengthened technological innovation and broadened the talent pool needed for national development. Women trained during the war carried invaluable experience into these expanding industries, helping shape early computing, radio communication networks, and global supply systems. Culturally, the wartime stories of these women became part of national memory, even if their contributions were not fully recognized until decades later. Books, documentaries, and historical studies eventually brought their experience into public view, inspiring new generations to appreciate the crucial roles women played in winning the war. The secrecy that had once silenced codebreakers, intelligence workers, and logistics specialists gave way to acknowledgement and honor. Monuments, museum exhibits, and wartime records now highlight the stories of women whose training propelled them into history's hidden front lines. In the broadest sense, the legacy of training women for the war effort was the permanent redefinition of what women could do. Their wartime contributions proved that ability, not gender, determined competence. Nations learned that in moments of crisis, overlooking half the population was a strategic mistake. Women's training had become more than preparation for temporary roles. It had become the foundation of a new social reality. As the world moved into the second half of the 20th century, the legacy of these women continued to unfold. Their wartime training had planted seeds of progress, empowerment, and possibility. It reshaped labor markets, transformed industries, strengthened national infrastructures, and inspired movements for equality. The echoes of their efforts resonate through modern society, reminding us that the war they helped win was not only a war against tyranny, but a war that changed the future of women forever.